On today's show, I battle seasonal allergies in an attempt to record a podcast about joining the Enterprise. Who will win, Paul or the Allergies? Hello, and welcome to the ExploreVM podcast. In this episode, we look into what it's like to move from a small shop to the enterprise IT as a professional. AJ, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is AJ Kuftic. I'm currently an architect for a very large health insurance company. I'll let you guess which one and then go look at my LinkedIn. But yeah, I started at a small, let's call it medium, but smaller shop compared to what I do now. And I'm going to try and help tell the journey.
So I would, make the assumption that the smaller shop was where you started in IT?
Yeah, I guess we could start there. So the small shop was not really a small shop. I just happened to work for a smaller part of a very big company. And they kind of treated the organization, in like little chunks and not as like one big, there was no there was a server team at headquarters, but there were server people at all the various remote locations. And sometimes they did the same things and sometimes they didn't. And so I kind of broke in just to the industry really, as an intern. And, I happened to be good at desktop support, as an intern. And then they had like a different intern position that started doing more network and server things. So I started picking that up. And then they hired me full time and I went back to, desktop support again, which was super fun when you have like domain admin powers and network powers, and then you have to go back to like installing Adobe Acrobat. This is all the same company. This is like I had the same boss. I just went from doing server stuff to doing desktop stuff again. But it's it was one of those like, okay, you are now in charge experiences versus kind of sort of the being just a member of a team. I had to lead two other people who were interns, but I still had to lead them and like determine what we were going to do. But I also had the ability to do things that other desktop people couldn't because I actually had the rights to go do them. So I started picking those sorts of things up. And when the server admin left to go to headquarters, they asked me to take his position because I had the previous experience. So just in general, my career is a combination of work plus opportunity and a whole lot of luck. Like I got lucky that the server person was leaving. I would have been stuck in desktop support probably for a while had he not left. And so it turned into moving up, not in a terribly long period of time either. I mean, it was a total of I was there for a total of 5 years. I was in that server position by year 3. Like, so it wasn't like this isn't like to say like I'm really great at what I do, but there's certain things that came quickly because of certain opportunities and things that had come up, that people thought I would be good to go do. While I was there, one of the developers, for an application came over and said, "Hey, you heard about this little thing called VMware?" And I was like, I hadn't, because at the time I had like heard of it, but I had only heard of like ever the desktop version, like not GSX. What was the other one? There was there was an actual desktop version that was not GSX. They might have had VM. It might have been there was Microsoft Server, something or other, Microsoft Virtual Server. But basically any virtualization I played with had just been like, I want to run another operating system on my desktop. Look at how cool this is with my, 2 gigs of memory. And so I said, no, I hadn't. And so we actually talked about doing it and we put some things together. We saw some demos of it. And one day I got two old servers and actually 3 old servers. The 2 hosts, and then I loaded one of them up with a bunch of disk and put FreeNAS on it. All of this story still plays to this day for a lot of people in their home labs. Right? This isn't a news story.
Right.
But in terms of how to build that sort of thing, I put my hands on some stuff. We weren't a small shop. I was managing 100 physical servers at this time. So not small, but not exactly gigantic either. Like I used to think it was a big deal to patch 100 servers. It's not a big deal to patch 100 servers. But going through and doing all that stuff and kind of juggling, day-to-day stuff with trying to learn new stuff, it involved me mostly being generally, one, I didn't have any kids, so that helped. But I would come into work and I would be at work until 7 o'clock at night. But after like 4 p.m., everybody would leave.
Yeah.
And so I would basically have like 3 hours to just play with stuff. And knowing what I know now and what I was doing then was probably not a great idea. I was like plugging in these like test lab stuff to real production networks. Shouldn't do that.
No.
But what ended up happening was we discovered that we could put our process control stuff, just to give you an idea of what kind of company this was. It involved a lot of process control. We put our process control software on it and then did vMotion, and it worked. And we realized that, oh, hey, look, we could really make this work, and this could make downtime not awful. Let's do that. So we went down the line of building out, I designed an entire thing. I was hosts. I had to build we had no shared storage. This was pre 10 gig networking, and this was the first time we were bringing in 10 gig networking. Our CIO at the time at headquarters said he wanted us to move towards a blade technology and get more dense, which was hilarious because it's not like I had a ton to like get dense. Like at headquarters, that's fine where you have like a very limited amount of physical space. And at the time we were still pretty physical heavy. And so, yeah, you want to get more dense. You want to build, a smaller physical footprint. But in this instance, I was going from like 5 sparsely loaded racks down to 1. Like it wasn't like the room didn't get smaller.
Right.
It wasn't like I was going to really shove more in there. It was like, no, this is fine.
We're just going to shrink it.
Right. But in that process, I got the chance to design a dual site SRM built VMware environment with storage and everything. Like I had opportunity. And I had to go present this to my CIO. It's like, hey, this is what we're looking at doing. This is a huge project for us, IT cost wise, but here are the real benefits of doing that. And what's funny is my wife, who likely will not listen to this podcast, but she knows this to be so very, very true. We had just generally started dating at the time, and she saw me working on this presentation. And she's an English major and a very, very good communicator, and is the sole reason I write 100 times better than I did when I was, in my early 20s. And she sat down and looked at this presentation and went, so who are you presenting this to again? I was like, the CIO. She goes, does he know all this stuff? And I was like, probably. And she goes, do you know that he knows this stuff?
Yeah.
I was like, no. And then she goes, then you need to explain some things. And like, I redid the entire thing. Like I don't even think there were letters that I put in the first one that made it to the second version. But I went and presented it, and he accepted, and I got to I guess play with more money for a project than I had ever thought I could ever get for a project at the time.
Yeah.
And so I built this design and documented it to the nines and used that as I don't want to say a calling card, but I used it as a way to show that I was capable of doing things. I decided to move on to other opportunities that had come up where I was starting to take over a more, let's call it mature environment. And I had to do like full upgrades from 3.5 to 4. Like, yeah, we went from 3.5 to 4 at that time. But I had to deal with different types of storage. I had to deal with, a virtual environment that was baked around a lot of SQL Server, which I had never really had to deal with before, but also at the same time doing SQL Server support, which I had never had to do before. And so it was one of those things where you have to learn kind of on the fly. And I I don't think there's any better learning opportunity than when you actually have to go do it. Like, you go to as many classes as you want to. You could lab things out as much as you want to. But for the most part, until you get your hand, to me, again, this is me.
Yeah.
Until you get your hands on stuff and actually have to run it in real life and find out what happens when it doesn't go right, that's when you actually learn stuff. Like, I learned more about VMware as a design, as a product and a design. And my design, looking back at it, my original design was actually pretty good. But there are things about it that I would change now. But in building all of these things, you have to take advantage of the opportunities you have. And sometimes you got to make those opportunities for yourself. I was only at that company for a very brief period of time, mostly because everyone left me. So I started on a 5-person team. By the end of it, it was just me.
Oh.
I had to train. I trained my replacement, and then I made my way out. So I could say that, like, those first 2 positions that I had were really, like, really set that foundation. But again, you're still doing a lot of things you're still doing things at a smaller scale. And when you do that, you have to do everything to the best that you can with what you're capable of dealing with. Now, so Nick Corti, I'm going to say Corti. I'm sorry, Nick. If Nick Cort, let's go with Cort. It's probably how you pronounce it. I'm sorry, Nick, if I'm butchering your name. But Nick is really the reason why Paul and I are talking right now. He specifically asked this question. And really what it comes down to is making the most with what you have. And sometimes that means you're building like a quarter of what you would do, right? But really all scale does is just do more of what that is, right? Like, if I built 4 hosts, I'm going to do it the same way as if I'm building 100 of them.
Yeah.
There just happens to be more of them. Yes, sometimes you get to do things the quote unquote right way. But I've also seen SMB size shops where IT is the lifeblood of it. But, like, my second job was the lifeblood. If there was something wrong, the entire business stopped.
Yeah.
And it's not like they'll limp along. It was, no, literally they stopped. And we built certain functions to handle what happened during outages. So, those are the sorts of things that you kind of have to do. In talking to people who are in SMB versus in enterprise, like I'm in an enterprise level now, so I will say this, vendors are friendlier.
Yes.
Vendors and partners get real friendly when you're in an enterprise. I can tell you that. But I think one of the things that you have to do if you're when you're in an SMB is get out and network when you can. Make friends, get on Twitter. I mean, Nick and many others who are in the vExpert group with you and I, Paul, you have a massive networking opportunity that you don't get from your, VMware sales rep, or you don't get it from your Microsoft rep, or you don't get it from anybody else. You have the ability to talk to people who are doing these sorts of things at scale, or who are doing things, who work for the vendor and can tell you, like, oh, hey, we have a customer, and they have 100 hosts in their main data center, but they have 15 remote sites that each have 4 hosts each.
Right.
That's effectively 15 SMBs.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like, if you could consider, there's a lot of stuff that you pick up in the SMB world that plays forward into enterprise. But then there's also things that come with being an enterprise that you don't want. All of the compliance stuff. Like,
right.
We could totally do without that.
Yeah, you can get away with a lot more when you're a 2-host, 4-host environment, a 20, 30, 40 person shop. Absolutely.
Yeah, when Linda in accounting sits next to you at lunch, you'll be all right if you break the accounting system for a little bit. when you don't know anybody in the accounting organization, and I'm saying organization is in that organization has multiple departments.
Yeah.
And you break something there, they don't know you. And those tickets come in quick, hot, and hard.
Right.
So, I would say that the big difference between SMB and enterprise is the level of relationship that you have with the end users. You likely know the end users a lot better than you know them in an enterprise, which is why enterprise people take a lot more care in terms of doing things, because they know that the person on the other end might be an executive who doesn't know you either, and would like you to never do that again, and will make it so that doesn't happen.
Right. It's a situation where you want to remain anonymous.
Yeah, I've said this on more than one occasion. IT are the elves in the night. We're supposed to do everything in the background. People aren't supposed to know who you are. In fact, if they don't know who you are the entire time you're there, you've probably done your job well, or you've not done your job at all. So I try really hard to make sure that I try to be more upfront with business anytime I'm in front of any of the business people as to how that I can help them. Because basically they're a nameless entity to you just as much as you're a nameless entity to them. That's the fun with enterprise. Like, enterprise sounds great, but it comes with political challenges, less technical challenges. But for Nick, the SMB to enterprise role, that big break for me came when I went to a partner. So I went to, shout out to Vero, now Serious Computer Solutions. But I moved. My wife and I moved to North Carolina for me to effectively jumpstart my career. At that point, I had 5 years of experience at the first company and 1 at the second. So I went to this company, and that's where it's not that you get the chance to think about things or scale or really think at a large scale, so much as you just see a lot more.
Yeah.
And seeing more helps you think about, well, hey, I once saw a customer who had a carpeted data center. Don't do that. Just FYI, don't do that. But these are the sorts of things you start to see, and these are the things you start to think about, like, oh, hey, I've seen things fail in funky manners, or I've seen things not work necessarily the way that you would expect them to, or the way even the documentation says it's supposed to. I think we're all familiar with those sorts of things.
Right.
But those are the sorts of things that you start to think about, because at the enterprise level, especially when you're in a higher tier of enterprise IT, like you're at an architect level or you're at a senior engineer level, there's an expectation that you know what you're doing. Seems weird, right?
Right. Got this title. Why would you know what you're doing?
Right. But the whole point is that when you break in, it's because you've seen things, or because you have the experience doing things. And there's no replacement for experience. Like, you can go and get all the certifications you want to. I got both VCAPs, VCAP 5s, DCV. By the way, for everybody saying the design test is hard, it's not that hard. It's really not that bad. The hardest part of the design test was which way the arrows went. And by the way, I got it all wrong the first time. I had them all backwards the first time. But the way that it turns out is that you start to think about things, and you start getting thrown things. Like, I was asked to go do a VDI deployment for a customer. Now, I didn't actually do the Vue portion of this program. I did all of the underlying infrastructure. But I walked in on site and had to basically kind of rejangle what had been done. Rejangle, that's a verb now.
Yeah, I think so.
But like, when you walk in and somebody has sold something, and now you have to put all the pieces together, and you realize that you got to find all the edge pieces of this puzzle first. And you realize that, oh, hey, there probably should be a smaller puzzle over on the right. And you got to make it work with the pieces you already have. those are the sorts of things. Those are like the design missions that you're given, right? Doing things at scale doesn't change that. It just means that sometimes you have to think about like, hey, how many times do I want to do this thing? How many times do I want to patch? How many man hours is it going to take to patch? How much automation can I put into patching? And I guess figure out like what is the most beneficial use of your time. Because, by the way, nothing changes. There's a lot more money involved in the amount of gear you can buy, but it doesn't change the fact that a man hour is a man hour. At SMB or an enterprise, there's X amount, there's 24 hours in a day. Nobody wants to work 24 hours. Everybody wants to work 8, right? So how do you have people who work 40 hours, and how do you not overwork them? So part of what I do as an architect is I also try to build things so that my team doesn't get overworked to death. I've had these conversations with many vendors, and a lot of times that conversation comes up like, oh, why don't you just do X? I've had this conversation with a lot of other people, with a lot of other like V experts, where the question is like, why don't you just do X and just put it together yourself? And the answer is, I don't want that for my team.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to hand a bunch of, like, me putting it all together. I can do that, no problem. But I also have four other people and a manager that I have to work with to make sure that works. And then there's an additional other half of my team that doesn't do really much VMware at all, and they get to call at 2 a.m. on a Saturday if it's broken.
Yeah.
So I have to make this as simple as possible, or at least as easy as possible. You could do a lot of things. You could build, open source file system, everything. And you could put all sorts of these management interfaces all on top and tie it all together with APIs and DevOps the whole thing. And then somebody still has to support that thing at 2 a.m.
Yep.
And you have to do all the training. And when it doesn't work, they're calling you. So those are the sorts of things that you start to get into, where in an SMB, those things might be more expected because people are asking, how do I do that? Or how do we do this and not pay money? We have the businesses asking for X, and we have X minus 5.
Right.
Like, we don't have the ability to do that, but the business is still asking for it. How do we do that? So those are the sorts of things where SMB kind of and enterprise don't really split all that much. But the other thing you could do as an SMB to actually do things at scale is to think about what you would do if you had 1,000 VMs. If you only have 100 VMs, think about how it would work if you had 1,000 and build it that way. So that at some point, because think about this, this is the other thing you could kind of flip here. If you're an SMB and your business discovers the next iPhone, you just went from SMB to enterprise.
Yeah.
Like, think about how it would work if you had 1,000 of them. Like, what would you do? Everybody has their, like, man, if I had $1 million, I would do this. All right, cool. Write it all down. Write down what you would do if you had unlimited money. Because guess what? There's money, there's time, and then there's training. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have unlimited time and you have unlimited money, you still need to train everybody on it.
Yeah.
If you don't have time, you could throw money in training at the problem, but that doesn't change the fact that you have no time. And if you have time and you have training, that doesn't mean you have the money to go do it. So if you may not have everything you want, like, yeah, you try to build things as simply as possible, but you try to think about how you would do it if this thing needed to scale. right? So you effectively just build starting blocks for everything, right? Like all of the hyper-converged stuff. I mean, we're building out a desktop. I have to build out a desktop platform that has to be Site HA and support 8,000 desktops per site, right? It has to be able to support 8,000 desktops at a site, right? It's the same thing as if I were building it for 200. I'm just doing a lot more of it.
Right.
Like if I build it with hyperconverged infrastructure, those blocks still scale up. You could think really large scale but do it much smaller. Because everything that happens now, whether that's cloud, whether that's, public cloud, AWS, Azure, GCP, or internal infrastructure, all of those things need to be able to scale. So basically just set it up so that you can. And you just may never get to. You may never get to pull the trigger that it's going to go and blow out 100 hosts or 4,000 VMs or whatever.
Right.
You just do your 4 hosts and your 100 VMs, but you're ready for the next stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call that future-proofing or just laying good foundations, but absolutely getting it set the right way the first time.
I would say that it's a good foundation.
Yeah.
All of the things. I mean, you have all the vCheck stuff. We have Power CLI. You have Ansible and Puppet and Chef and all of these other things. Those are opportunities. Those are ways that you could do things that are enterprise scale, but that you just won't use the full scale of, which is a perfectly fine thing to do. I mean, the thing I built for the medium-sized, let's call it a medium-sized company, but the thing I built for them was built to handle 100 VMs. But that could have scaled out to another 20 hosts, and it could have scaled out to another, 500 to 1,000 VMs. No problem. The vCenter was designed correctly. The hosts were designed correctly. They just needed more resources and more disk. But they were designed to go out and be bigger. By the way, that would have been a perfect design for hyperconverged looking back at it. Like if I had hyperconverged now, like the way the hyperconverged is now,
yeah,
man, I could have put that in back there and been done in like a day.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I think the you break into an enterprise role by as much as this stinks. If you really want to go up to enterprise, you go start interviewing with enterprises. You either start interviewing with enterprises or you start going to partners and you start getting the feel for it. If you go from enterprise SMB to enterprise just direct, you'll likely get pulled in and maybe a lower level engineer, even though you might be the top guy where you are now. You might get pulled in as a lower level engineer. But then you take advantage of every opportunity you get. When somebody hands you a project, you knock it out.
Yeah.
When someone hands you an idea, you go do it and you do it well. And sometimes you're going to have to go build servers. And sometimes you're going to have to deal with, my server doesn't run fast enough. If you look, and then you're sitting there staring at perfmon, you're staring at ESX performance charts. But the idea is that you make it so that when opportunities come up, you get chosen.
Yeah.
That's the difference. When you do things well enough that when those opportunities happen, you go do it. Because I have people on my team that their first job out of college is in my group, and that's great. But there's a lot of the SMB stuff that happens where you kind of have to put a lot of hats on, and when you put all those hats on, you start to see things from different angles. Like your network team kind of hates you because you use too many ports. Like, why does your network team hate you because you use too many ports? Well, because that means they have to configure all of these ports and they have to deal with ports all over the place. And they have to deal with how your connectivity works and where all your firewalls go. Those are the sorts of things you don't understand if you've been a server admin for 10 years.
Right.
And your network team your network team sounds like a bunch of jerks. But if you've seen the networking side of things, you're like, oh, I get it now. I'm sorry, guys. So shout out to my network team for doing all the things that they do, because I sometimes I put too much. I maybe I put some things on them, but I also could sit down and look at a config with them and go, oh no, you got to put spanning tree, you got to do port type edge trunk, because if you don't do that, Spanning Tree tries to do a full thing instead of doing it just basically Spanning Tree port fast. And they're like, oh, okay, sorry. And they put that on, and then they know that I'm speaking the same language they are.
Yeah.
That helps. And that's the other thing that SMB people get that enterprise people don't. Enterprise people get thrown into more silos than Iowa, and you don't get to see all the other fun stuff. And that sort of thing leads to me, this is just personal opinion, as somebody who's worked in a bunch of big enterprise and seen and worked with people who are in big enterprise, they don't look across the silos. They just want their thing, and they know that they have to go to the storage team for that LUN, and they don't understand that LUN involves zoning and involves, do you need this replicated or not, and where storage really comes from. Like they don't teach you that in server schools. They don't teach you where storage really comes from. And those sorts of things. Use your SMB experience as your springboard to a bigger enterprise thing. You can do it, but you have to go in and really sell yourself like crazy and basically follow what Nick does. Nick is in the community. He makes networking opportunities for himself. He talks to, people who are at the vendors who are smart and you want to ask smart questions to people at vendors because then they want to answer your questions. When you ask how does vMotion work? They're not here for that, right? They're here for, if we're looking at doing multi-NIC vMotion, but does that really gain us anything right now because we're on 10 gig and we're not really seeing any issues? Oh, no, it doesn't really. And if you're going to do, if you had single gig, I would have said, yes, this absolutely makes a ton of sense because it makes your vMotions go faster and thus, it can move things around and not take as much network bandwidth to do that. Like those are the sorts of things. Those are the sorts of questions you want to ask. But also show that, hey, I've done a bunch of things. I've shown that I've learned a bunch of things. I can do multiple things and learn new stuff because that's the other thing enterprises don't do a great job of, is new things that come out. Enterprises also can be, some of them can have a tendency to turtle up a little bit.
Yeah.
And want to do the new fancy thing because they're scared of affecting their overall business. I know that it seems like only enterprise ever does cool things because they're the logos who are on the neat products. But that's because, those companies, the vendor wants to show that big company believes in it because they know that when big companies believe in stuff, little companies will go, well, big company X is doing something. We should be doing what big company X is doing.
Right.
Then none of those companies start with a GU and end with a GUL. By the way, just as a general side note, hi Kitty.
There was the cat.
I generally don't like when people say like, oh, this is what Google's doing. I'm like, yeah, you're not Google. Like very few companies are Google. In fact, the only company that's Google, it's Google.
Yeah, there's exactly one Google, there's one Facebook, there's one Amazon. You don't have to do it like them.
No, but if there are ways that you don't have to do it like them. But if there are things that they're doing that maybe make weirder sense, like all of the SRE stuff that Google does, it's not because like we want to be more like Google, but when you start thinking about the concepts of like, okay, here's an error bank and here's how we handle failures and we fail quickly and try to, do things, try to do code pushes faster. Okay. Maybe that makes your business more agile. Maybe that makes your business capable of doing more things and doing things quickly versus like, this is how Google does it. Don't think of it as how Google does it. Think of it as how the actual business, does that actually make the business better? Or are you just doing it because you want to pretend you're Google? Did we, maybe we answered Nick's question? I hope
Yeah, no, we absolutely did. And as you and I discussed before we started, we had a couple of questions outlined to go with, and we've actually tackled all of those right out of the box there. I could have stopped you at like 1,000 points and dove into like 13 other topics. So we'll stay on track though. We'll stay on track.
We'll pick one. Let's go.
So outside of the whole, like the scales and like laying the groundwork, if your SMB shop were to blow up, What other aspects of enterprise IT can the smaller shop look into, or the smaller IT professional look into?
Um, I think if you go down the route of looking at new things, making the time for lab time, I'm lucky, and I do thank many people who work in my organization that I have a lab at work, to the point where I don't have a home lab because my lab at work is kind of nice. Um, uh, you work on things that seem new and cool and take the opportunities to learn new and cool stuff. Maybe you don't ever use it. Maybe you think, oh, hey, that costs too much. That's fine. But certain times, like in newer technologies, like I'll say this, AWS and Azure, they have free tiers. Go stand some stuff up. Either stand them up on your own or stand them up for, a concept for work. There's a lot of things that I'll say about cloud, all of which are be careful. Not that I'm not a server hugger. I try not to be a server hugger. But really consider what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. If you want to try and do enterprise things, but do them in an SMB way, consider it deeply. Consider what you're doing. New project comes up. Somebody wants to replace everything. Okay, document it. Write it all down. Try and come up with the best way to do it. Think about it deeply and understand everything that's about it, and not just, oh, hey, this thing is cheap. I find a lot of IT gets done cheaply, but because it's done cheaply, there are things that get missed, or it's done in a fashion so that, well, we decided to not do X because it was going to cost 5% more to do it that way. Okay, fine. That's fine. But why did you do that?
Yeah.
Did you do it because it was a cost issue, or did you do it because you didn't really need it, or you decided that it wasn't important, or that no, it really was money? And those are all of those are options, right? When you're in an SMB, you don't have unlimited funding to play with, but business value can come out of certain things. And if you're deciding that it's just not important, or that whatever it is you're going to do is not going to actually help the business, that's enterprise too. I mean, enterprises may seem like they have a ton of money, and they can, but in a lot of instances, they're asking the same questions SMBs do. Do we really need this? Is this the thing that really helps us? None of those things really change. I think really what it means is that you're doing things at scale doesn't necessarily make anything different, other than sometimes you're buying 100 of something instead of 25 of something. So I think that at the end of the day, you spend the time working on you spend the time trying to learn about new things, and kind of keeping stuff in your back pocket. Like, I work for a very large enterprise. Right now we don't have NSX. Right? That's not because I don't think that NSX is bad. I can't say things like that in the face of Tim Davis. But there's a face joke, everyone. I think it's on Twitter. But I can't. I'm not going to. It's not that I think that in particular NSX is bad. I'm trying to find a great use case for it, because again, NSX isn't cheap, right? This is the same. Whether I work for a gigantic company or I work for a teeny tiny SMB. You have great use cases for the things you're going to go spend money on. And then when it's time to actually go execute on that, have the correct business case to do it and make it unbreakable. It's a no-brainer to do it, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody who has VMware, right? Every, let's say 3 to 4 years, you're probably going to have to replace some hosts. You're going to have to replace some storage. Those are your opportunities to do something large or make a gigantic change to hyper-converged, or hey, maybe, our next renewal of our support contract for a storage array because we don't want to buy a brand new one. Let's go see if we can just extend the support. And then storage vendor hits you back with that quote to renew it, and it's crazy expensive. And that's when you say, okay, well, instead of spending that money, maybe we do some cloud things, or maybe instead of running our own Exchange, we do Office 365, or those sorts of things are not inherently an enterprise level thinking process. You could think like an enterprise, but operate like an SMB. You could do it. It's just a lot more painful when the cool thing you want to do costs a lot of money. But at the same time, there are ways to do these sorts of things, and I tell this to people all the time because I've seen SMB. Like, we built 3 hosts with a VNXE in the year of our Lord 2016. Like, this is, no, it wasn't 2016. It was 2015. Yeah, it was 2015. And it was their first time ever seeing VMware in 2015.
Right.
Right? The first time they ever saw VMware was 6.0.
They missed all the fun.
They missed all the fun. But their SMB was based around running a bunch of websites. And for some reason, they thought that it would be okay to run a bunch of websites on virtual or on physical hosts. I don't know why.
Right.
But those are the sorts of things where no one was actually thinking that way. No one was thinking about, how do we do this better? How do we do this so that we make our maintenance windows smaller? How do we do this so that, we do, some sort of load balancing with, the free version of NetScaler, or we do it with F5 Big IP LTM, or we do it with Nginx. We do it with some form or function where you're thinking like an enterprise but operating as an SMB. It's completely possible. And it takes, sometimes you have to operate like an enterprise too, and say, this is what this is going to do for us, and this is how it actually helps the business. Because if your organization sees IT as a cost center, and a lot of them still do, but as long as your organization sees IT as just the necessary evil, you're probably never going to get anything fun to do, and you have to show that necessary evil and how you improve the business. Even if it's just something simple like, hey, VMware lets us handle physical hardware failures better. Like, that's the same argument I made almost 10 years ago now to do my very first VMware build. It allows us to handle physical hardware failures better. Like, if a hardware fails, host vSphere HA reboots everything on a different host. And that eliminates the amount of downtime we would have due to physical hardware. Those are the sorts of things that you could, that's the thing that you would write down in a document on why you're doing something in an enterprise, inside of an enterprise. It's the same thing in an SMB. But if you really want to break into it, you just kind of have to go do it. And either go get the experience by seeing a ton of stuff, or you just start applying and show why.
Yeah, and that kind of pertains to a message I've relayed a bunch. It's getting out there in the community. I started I had a very small contract to start my IT career, but then I ended up at a VAR that focused on SMBs, with clients as small as one guy with his computer up to 14 branches across 3 states. But the vast majority were at the way low end of that. And so I just kept doing what I had to do for these smaller clients, making that business case for, all right, we're going to get rid of this single host, or this single physical server, and and there's a lot of cases it was like this. We're going to bring in one box and run VMware on it. We're going to put all of your servers on it, because they don't have the budget for shared storage. They don't have the need for 3 hosts. But you're taking what you've learned, and you look to see where that can go in the enterprise world. And I stayed heavily involved in vMugs and blogging and Twitter, which I'm hoping everybody listening is involved with a lot of that. And I ended up moving into a VAR, which offered me more experience with the enterprise end of things. And I sure didn't know a lot about enterprise when I even started this position. And there's still stuff I've got to learn about enterprise. But it's out there, and you can make that move through experience and through from, a very low and a small environment. You've just got to have that drive and that willingness to learn.
Right. And as long as you take advantage of those opportunities, like I was talking about earlier, when someone says, hey, we're going to build and if you're going to build your first VMware environment, or you're going to build your first, this is going to be painful to say, I'm going to build my first Windows cluster. You actually take advantage of that, and you try to do everything to the best of your ability, so that when these opportunities come up to do newer things or do cooler things, they go, he's got it. He did this other thing, and he did it well. I've spent the better part of my career doing pretty much nothing but VMware, but I also learned Cisco UCS along the way, and EMC storage and NetApp storage, and learning about Nutanix and vSAN and NSX, and learning about all these things. But a lot of them, like the first time I ever saw Nutanix was in 2012. Like, I knew I was never going to get to buy anything like that. And working for the VAR we worked for, we weren't really going to sell too much of it. But when the opportunity came up that we did sell Nutanix, the first person that got to go shadow it was me. Right? It's, again, taking advantage of the opportunities that are given.
Yeah.
And then you start to see new stuff, and you start to think about what it is that you're going to do with that knowledge. Now, maybe you just take it and you go, oh, hey, Azure has a new file server sync thing that lets you run file servers on premises, but it syncs to the cloud, kind of like Dropbox, maybe. Okay, I'm going to put that in my back pocket. I may never need it, but I'm going to put it in my back pocket. I'm going to, 6.5 is out, and 6.5 does encrypted in-flight vMotion. I don't need that for compliance, but maybe we could turn it on, and that would be a cool thing to do, and understand how that's a thing. Because guess what? So at some point, somewhere along the line, you might catch a Department of Defense contract and have to turn that on because somebody's telling you to do.
Yeah.
So those are the sorts of things that I kind of focus on, is like, learn about stuff. Right? I know that sounds like a really generic, really vague thing, but learn about stuff. Read blogs, keep an eye on the entire industry, because who saw things like Rubrik and Cohesity coming?
Right.
Nobody. Right? No one saw those two things coming. And now they're kind of, wrecking shop slowly through the backup and secondary storage industry. Who saw the ACI NSX battle coming? Who saw Cisco and VMware going to war?
Right.
No one. Right? But you kind of keep your eye on those sorts of things, and, beware of FUD. But there's a certain piece of that comes along with just kind of keeping your eye on the industry, because if you don't, even enterprises can get caught slipping, right? SMB, you sometimes can use your small size to do neater things quicker, as long as they're generally free. But in larger organizations, you might have to do a ton of stuff by the book, and sometimes the book is a very large contract you have with a vendor, right? And sometimes that contract doesn't exactly preclude using other vendors, or other teams don't want you to do things that necessarily they do because audit reasons, or because they don't want you to do it because fear. Like, those are the sorts of things that you could show coming out of an SMB and wearing multiple hats that actually work. And if you could show that you do that at scale, that can really play well.
Well, sir, we could keep this podcast going for a few hours. I'm certainly going to have you back and discuss a few other things in the future. But are you currently working on any projects? Got any blogs, anything you'd like to promote?
I have a blog, virtualpotholes.com. It's infrequently updated. And by the way, but if you're starting a blog, and I'm saying this to people who have thought about blogging, or they're not really sure what they were right about, here's what you do. Use as your personal knowledge base. I had the very first post on my blog, a second post, because like the first one was like, hey, hi, I'm AJ. The second post on my blog was about backing up 2008 VMs with Net Backup, I think, on ESX4. And the entire reason that I wrote that blog post was because I ran into that exact issue and I had to fix something and I wanted to remember what it was. So that's it. That's the entire reason I blog. So if you see a blog post from me, it's because I probably ran into a problem at work and I wanted to remember what it was after that was done. And then the other thing I would say is that listen to Paul's podcast. Listen to more episodes of this because this has been super fun. And if you have questions, I'm on Twitter at AJ Kuftic, Kuf as in Frank, TIC. And I'm sure that Paul will tweet out some things about he did a podcast with me. But yeah, please, if you have any questions, you have more questions about this, please let me know. And I'm more than happy to talk about this sort of stuff because I want people to grow in their careers and do cool things because I got to do cool things and I shouldn't be the only one who gets to do cool things. So.
Yeah, I agree. That's half the reason I do the podcast is to help others grow and further themselves and extend their careers.
All right.
So, well, AJ, I want to thank you for your time.
Thanks, Paul.
As always, thank you for listening. What do you think? I think I fared pretty well against the allergies. If you'd like to continue the conversation about moving to the enterprise, be a guest on the ExploreVM podcast, or have a show idea, reach out to me on Twitter at ExploreVM, Facebook.com/ExploreVM, or email me, paul@ExploreVM.com. Once again, thank you for listening.